Hello, my name is Matthias Schmidt. I'd like to welcome you to our today's unit on advanced sensory evaluation and the way of actually tasting wine. In the coming slides, we are talking a bit about the history of wine tasting, certain important wine parameters, wine tasting situations, tasting conditions, some difficulties that might show up during tasting wines, how to prepare the samples, and what is the common tasting process that you should go through. Furthermore, then we have some specific categories of products that we will address here. First of all, how to evaluate sparkling wines, how to evaluate fortified wines, how to deal with so-called low intervention wines. Some others talk here about natural wines. And then finally also about orange wines. So starting with the history of wine tasting, throughout history, tasting has had a significant role in wine culture, which is quite old. But as trade progressed, it became crucial to taste wine in order to assess its quality, also in order to assess its later price, the value it is worth. So the first known recorded description of a detailed assessment of wine is noted going back to 1384. In the 18th century then, it was Linnaeus and Poncelet who formalized the methodology of tasting wines and bringing it up to certain modern standards here. So until recently, wine tasting was restricted to sommeliers, merchants, and wine producer. However, it is progressing, and since 1980s, it is becoming more and more popular also as a recreational activity such as wine tourism, etc. More and more recently, with the advanced technology, also virtual wine tasting have gained popularity, not just due to pandemic situation, but this was definitely a further driving factor for also online tasting sessions that you can do on your own at home. So let's go on. So the first important parameter that you have to assess while you go through wine tasting in a bit more organized way is the color. So the main color parameters of wine are, first of all, the hue. The hue refers to the dominant color of the wine, such as red, white, pink, and that can vary depending a bit on the variety, the region, and the winemaking techniques in a certain way. Second, it's the intensity. So this refers to the depth of a color in a wine, and it can range from pale to deep. The intensity can also be an indicator a bit on the grape variety, the age of the wine. And for example, you see here different classes, and one good example is the deep yellow, which is definitely different in terms of intensity towards a pale straw yellow colored wine. So to continue, we also have to talk about the opacity. This refers to the clarity of a wine or how easily you can see through while you're holding the glass in front of you. A wine can be clear, hazy, or cloudy. So usual wines that go through a normal winemaking practice, I would say, are clear. Nevertheless, there are even wines on the market that are hazy or cloudy, either due to instabilities, for example, like coming from thermolyable proteins, or due to the fact that you just did not filter the wine. The wines can be hazy or cloudy. The next parameter is the rim variation. This refers to the color at the edge of the wine in the glass. The rim can be a different color from the center of the wine, and that gives you clues about the wine's age and how it progressed so far. So here on the right-hand picture, you see a red wine, where to the right-hand side, the rim variation tends to go more into a brownish color. So this indicates the wine is aged, it was oxidized, so the anthocyanins turn brown, whereas to the left-hand side, the rim variation is more going to a purple, meaning the wine is still at a very young stage. The viscosity of a wine you can see easily while you move your glass, and so you get so-called legs or tears that are running down the inner side of the glass then, and that refers in terms of viscosity to an elevated alcohol content or elevated sugar levels, and furthermore to the component called glycerol. Glycerol is one of the main fermentation byproducts of the yeast, and it also indicates that you're having initially a higher sugar level and finally a higher alcohol level. The next parameter is the evolution. This refers to how the color of the wine changes over the time, particularly for red wines, like indicated in the previous slide, as it turns brownish. Red wines that are aging, furthermore, lose their intensity and shift towards more an orange brownish note, while whites turn more into a brownish color. And with aging, we can even have sediments due to that. The last parameter, the effervescence, is mainly for sparkling wines or for wines that have a certain CO2 that you even see in the glass. The point effervescence is coming again when it is explicitly or specifically about judging sparkling wines. So the color parameters, to sum up, are important in evaluating and describing wine and can provide a good insight into the wine's quality, its age, and the winemaking process that is in charge of, and furthermore the origin. The wine aroma is a crucial aspect of wine tasting and its evaluation. It provides clues about the wine's grape variety, indirectly also the origin, the winemaking process, and the age. The main aroma parameters in wine, they include first of all the primary aroma. These are fruit, floral, and herbal aromas that come directly from the grape variety. Primary aromas can vary depending on the grape variety and the climate and the soil where the grape were grown. So here we also have a kind of terroir influence. The secondary aromas are, for example, those that come from the winemaking process, such as fermentation and aging. Secondary aromas, they include yeasty, nutty, buttery scents, but even fruity notes. The tertiary aroma are those components that come from the aging of the wine, such as oak or bottle aging. Those aromas can include vanilla, caramel, spice, even up to petrol notes that come from aging of the wines. The next points we have to talk about are intensity. The intensity of a wine refers to the strength of the aromas in the wine, and they can range from faint or subtle to very strong. Next point is the complexity. This refers to the number of different aromas present in the wine, as well as how they interact with each other. The sixth point is the quality, so meaning the complexity, the breadth, and the aromatic cleanliness. By evaluating those parameters, the taster gains an understanding of the quality, the grape variety, and its age. The aroma evaluation is a fundamental or important part of wine tasting, and it can help the wine professionals to make really informed decisions about production, storage, and selection. So to go back all the process of winemaking. So the wine flavors there are, so there is an infinite number of flavors which can be grouped into sweet components, acids components, salty components, bitter components, and the umami. And yeah, after each term here, you see the typical parameters or components that are in charge of. Furthermore, those different flavors can be influenced by the temperature. The tasting temperature plays here a really important role. So usually the warmer, the bit more pronounced most of those parameters are. The texture of the wine and also the pressure or CO2 content of the wine. So usually CO2 making the perception even more pronounced. Other aspects of kind of flavors in wine are, for example, what the enologists call the extract. It's the set of components that are not volatile, but they have a certain sensation. So, for example, the sugars, but also the non-volatile acids, the phenols, the proteins, and glycerin. The alcoholic degree also has a strong effect on the perception of the wine. Ethanol is the main volatile component in wine, and the higher the alcohol content is, the more body fullness wines have, the more bitter they get, the more a warm sensation you can get. And on the other hand, high alcohol levels tend to cover or overlap aroma components. The texture means the smoothness or the roughness of the wine. The length is the degree of presence the wine has in your mouth. So does it have a really long lasting presence, or is it just quickly gone? And then finally also the aftertaste. It's the persistence of the wine in your mouth. Is it going in a pleasant way, or is it staying kind of harsh with a bad aftertaste? And how to bring all those different parameters together. For example, there is a scheme by Max Leclis that represents the qualities and defects of a wine. And in the middle of that concept that you see here in the bottom is balance. So with all high quality wines or wines of a certain quality, you have the harmony and the balance of all the different attributes as a really key point. So a wine can be really strong in one parameter and maybe into another, but the really balanced wines, that are usually the more outstanding ones. So let's talk about tasting situations. So tasting procedures can vary depending on the taster and the situation, but there are generally accepted steps to follow, and they are depending. So wine tasting situations could be, first of all, a ranking. So you do a sensory analytical ranking in terms of differences between the wines without indicating why or what degree. So in a kind of a discriminative test. You could furthermore do a ranking in terms of assessing regional, stylistic, and varietal expressions. So which is the most typical, which is the most Riesling-like, for example. Or you could rank on certain aesthetic attributes, so like which one has the strongest smell impression or which has the sweetest taste, for example. But there are also commercial rankings, so they are typically quite quick and they are assessing only a certain immediate impression, so just quickly get an opinion. They are often designed to achieve medals, so for news or media attention. There are other wine tasting situations that focus more on the aesthetic points, so they are more consumer oriented. They provide a certain structured experience to the wine. They are typically more holistic rather than just purely analytic. They are used to assess consumer preference, so like a common wine description, for example, which gives a detailed picture about the wine and also gives some clues or ideas what the wine can be consumed with. So let's move to the next point, sensory analysis in terms of standardized research focus. So the sensory science is a bit more modern field in terms of research. It is, on the other hand, interesting practical research tool. It can give you direct clue about what planning to be done to achieve a predetermined set of attributes in your final wine, for example. It can also help you to determine if a change in production has a severe or just a mild or just not to be perceived impact on the sensory attributes. If yes, what is precisely the change in terms of sensory attributes? You could also use it to assess if those parameters or those changes are consumer relevant, also to assess whether the change in production is more cost effective. You could also use it to assess the progress in wine maturation, and you can also use it to check for off flavors that are developing during aging and to have a rapid remedial action or correction of that wine fault slightly appearing. Sensory analyzers are furthermore an academic research tool. It is represented as a wine sensory measure for, let's say, different attributes that are shown graphically or in words in a kind of a description. It can help to differentiate between wines based on their sensory attributes. It also provides a certain support for geographic appellations. So let's say, in other words, to create a certain list of typical attributes for a certain appellation or sub-appellation. So it also gives you a tool or way to understand the origin, the chemical nature of the wine differences, and finally bring it to words. But what steps to follow to prepare a sensory evaluation in a scientific way? So like there are norms or rules for nearly everything, there is also a norm for tasting rooms used in a scientific manner. You should have an ambient temperature approximately 18 degrees Celsius. So when it is quite warm in summer, check for the possibility of having air condition, or while it is too cold in winter, for sure have heating. Also the humidity of the room is normed. Way more important, the absence of noise in the room, so that you're really focused on the product that you are tasting. The walls should have a single color, light and neutral, usually white. The light, so the illumination, should be between a value of 200 and 400 lux, which is corresponding to usual daylight condition. The light should be uniform and distributed artificially all over the room in a more or less the same manner. The room for sure should be free of odors, so it shouldn't be musty, moldy like in an old cellar, or not smell from chlorine, from a cleaning agent, for example. The tables should be white, and have a spittoon close by. Besides the room, the tasters should also show a certain conditions. So while assessing wine in a correct way, you should be rested, awake, and healthy. Especially orally, you should be in good health. Before, you shouldn't have too heavy meals. You shouldn't be a heavy drinker or heavy smoker, and especially not just quickly in front of a tasting. To be a good taster, you should be adapted to it, and you should have a constant training on the major wine attributes. Furthermore, you shouldn't use too loud or too heavy perfumes, lotions, creams, leather clothing that has a certain smell. So furthermore, in the end, hope that's not discriminating. You shouldn't be older than 60 years. The point behind that is that the performance of a taster is usually decreasing with age. That goes back to the loss of sensors on your tongue while you are aging. But on the other hand, you can train yourself and you keep a certain performance upright due to that. And I would say there are many, many examples of really good experienced tasters that are older than 60 years. So what difficulties tasters might have? First of all, you have to mention that there's a certain subjective nature of tasting. So you all have personal preferences, etc., that you, have to switch off. Tasting and smelling does not mean it is a precise, standardized measurement that goes one-to-one into numbers. So you have to find certain standards, practice, and to have a common understanding to translate that in real numbers then. To assess some critical parameters, you should also have a certain extended enological knowledge about the winemaking process and why the wine tastes like it is. There is no infallibility, so different judgments can happen on the same wine. So while you're tasting in a jury, for example, there could also be some case where the opinions shift into two different directions. You have to see that there is a certain physiological rhythm of each panelist that changes throughout the day. Commonly, it's said the best condition for tasting wine is usually in the morning between 10 to 12. You get a certain palate fatigue or a saturation phenomenon while you're tasting too many wines in a row. So you should have breaks in between tasting. You should neutralize your senses again. So don't taste too long and too intensively in a row. Tasters can be highly influenced. That's why we have certain standards on the occasions where you are tasting. It should be quiet, no discussions going on during the tasting, first of all. And there is a certain multiplicity of wine types. Wine is a kind of living organism or product that evolves over time. So you should also be aware of that wine styles or wines can change a bit over time. What prejudices or priorities are commonly found? So usually chemists, they are looking for analytical defects. Does it have volatile acidity or is something wrong that we could also find in terms of analytical figures in the wine? An enologist is quite often looking for a defect. Is it reductive? Yes or no? Just as an example. The officials look for illegal details in terms of labeling or whatever. The merchant is maybe asking himself, okay, what is the economic value of that wine? And the journalists could have a certain question, is there a story behind the wine to tell, yes or no? Okay, so how should you prepare the samples for the tasting then? So you should place representative samples from, if you're taking barrel samples from the center or the middle of the tank. While you're having a batch of bottled wine, you should have not the first bottles coming out of the bottling line or the last bottles coming off the bottling line, so somewhere in the middle so that the sample is really representative. While having barrel samples, you should plan an immediate tasting to avoid oxidation going on. Or while you have opened the bottles for tasting preparation, taste them soon, not to have them oxidized, especially while you have served them already for a certain time in the glass. While filling the glass, be aware of dust, glue, sealing wax from the bottle, cork leftovers, or from the capsule. Order the wines according to increasing intensities in terms of alcohol, in terms of sugar, in terms of acidity, etc. Or tannins is another good example for that. And prepare the wines according to type. If you have a barrel sample of a red wine and it still has CO2, eliminate that, not to have a negative influence on the wine. If a wine requires a bit of oxygen, decant it. If it has a sediment, remove the sediment. You can easily do that by decanting them. Or if it is just coming out of fermentation and is still quite reductive, also give it the possibility of seeing a bit of oxygen, just as an example.